The counteroffensive that has been so long awaited has run into serious problems, and Ukraine has been forced to radically change its original plans. That, however, might not be a bad thing. Since the winter snows began to melt, it seems all anyone was talking about was Ukraine's spring offensive. While most outlets refer to it as a counteroffensive, we have to take a moment to remind you that Russia completely failed at winter offensives, thus there was nothing for Ukraine to counter. The expected spring fighting would have therefore been more properly called a simple offensive. In preparation for the offensive, Ukraine had pulled tens of thousands of soldiers from the front lines and ran them through NATO training programs in friendly nations across Europe and even the United States. The specialized training focused on bringing Ukrainian troops up to date with modern NATO-style doctrine of combined arms warfare. But the important part to remember is that while they did receive superior training, many of these soldiers were fresh conscripts to the war. They're yet to cut their teeth in combat, but at least they would have been far better trained than even veteran Russian soldiers. The real bells of the coming ball, however, was all that fancy Western equipment that Ukraine would be receiving. After a year of browning its collective pants in terror at Putin's Potemkin army and pathetic nuclear threats, NATO finally broke the dam on heavy equipment and gave Ukraine a sizable contingent of Bradley infantry fighting vehicles and Leopard 2 tanks, which it was assumed would spearhead the spring offensive. Western leaders like U.S. General Mike Milley assured us that Ukraine had every tool necessary for its coming offensive. That didn't quite turn out to be true, as when the offensive launched it was clear things weren't exactly progressing along the best expectations. For the first few weeks of fighting, Ukraine enacted a blackout on all media across the Eastern Front. This effectively ceded the propaganda initiative to Russia, and pictures and video of Ukrainian losses began to hit the blogosphere, convincing the world that Ukraine was losing unsustainable casualties because, for some reason, we all collectively forgot that Russia lies through its teeth. Internet sleuths went to work discovering that Russia was pulling some fast ones, like filming the same destroyed Western vehicles from multiple angles to give the impression that Ukraine had lost all Western tanks given to it in a single battle. But that didn't stop the inexhaustible tide of bullshit, and bullshit has a quality all of its own when in great enough quantities. Western opinions on continuing to supply Ukraine began to flag. What good was our fancy gear if it was just getting annihilated the moment it crossed the border? However, after a month of fighting, it became clear that losses of Western tanks and IFVs were well within expected and reasonable parameters. Ukraine and its NATO allies have kept the exact losses a secret for good reason, but we know that within the first week of fighting, Ukraine had lost 4 Leopard 2s out of the 85 that had been given. Similar stories kept popping up throughout the summer. It's probably safe to say that Ukraine has had 24 or so Leopards taken out of combat by now. What these stories don't tell you, however, is that most of these Leopard and Bradley losses were quickly recovered off the battlefield. Poland and Germany have been brainstorming where and how to best repair these vehicles and send them back into the fight, and the Ukrainians are repairing some themselves. More importantly, lots of photo and video evidence has shown that these vehicles did the job they were designed to do: keep their crews safe through catastrophic events. Lost vehicles can be repaired or replaced, but lost crews are gone forever. Their Russian counterparts, however, are rarely so lucky. To date, there have been no true sweeping victories in the style we expected, but that doesn't mean that Ukraine is losing. In fact, by all accounts, not only is Ukraine winning, it's retaking territory and doing something far more important. It's leveling the playing field between itself and Russia logistically. Echoes of disappointment over Ukraine's counteroffensive are not uncommon, and that's partly because we were spoiled by the stunningly successful fall counteroffensive that saw large swaths of territory retaken in the north of the country. However, the situation today is wildly different from a year ago. Last fall, Ukraine was facing unprepared Russian positions, punching right back on the heels of Russia's own offensive as it ran out of steam. It was without a doubt a truly brilliant piece of military strategy, something history books will be talking about for centuries to come. In war, it's incredibly difficult to find the perfect time to launch a counterattack, and even harder to mislead your opponent on where that blow is going to land. Ukraine, with the help of NATO intelligence and U.S. military planners, did exactly that. But the spring offensive, which ended up turning into a summer offensive, is facing a different challenge altogether. While in the fall, Russia had little time to consolidate its position before getting punched in the face by Ukrainian tanks, this time it had all of the winter and most of the spring to prepare for a very loudly telegraphed offensive. This meant months of digging trenches and anti-tank ditches, putting up vast minefields and fortifying defensive choke points. Ukraine was facing one of the most difficult battles since World War II, and it had to undertake the battle while still outnumbered in artillery and at the mercy of the Russian Air Force. It was a deeply unenviable position to be in, and the fact that Ukraine launched the offensive anyway shows that Ukrainians really do have cojones the size of grapefruits. Facing very stiff defenses, the low quality of Russia's mostly conscript force didn't matter much, because even a conscript with only 2 weeks of training in stealing the copper wiring out of a vehicle can be difficult to remove from a prepared position. Making matters worse was the sudden reappearance of the Russian Air Force, which had largely been AFK, and that's probably been a good thing, given that Russia has shot down nearly as many of its own jets as Ukraine has. However, throwing Russia's remaining fleet of attack helicopters might have been catastrophic to their air force, with a reported 6 Ka-52s downed in the first 2 weeks of fighting, but it did the job of significantly hampering the Ukrainian advance. Vast minefields with scores of pre-sighted artillery didn't help matters much either. Losses were significant in some parts, and some advances were repelled altogether at a great loss. And this is something you should remind someone when they express dissatisfaction with the speed of the Ukrainian offensive. There's real people fighting and dying for every single meter gained, and if someone's unhappy with how fast it's all going, then remind them that they're welcome to leave their comfortable first world life and join the Ukrainian Foreign Legion to help it all move along a little bit faster. Russia was nonetheless feeling pressure from the Ukrainian offensive, which has been making slow but steady gains across nearly the entire front. In Bakhmut, Russian artillery is no longer dominant, Ukrainian artillery is, and they've been making the Russians pay dearly for it. With pressure mounting, Russia went full Russia and committed what might have been the largest war crime yet with the destruction of the Kakhovka Dam. While pundits continue to pretend as if there's any reason to doubt Russia was responsible, it's obvious that the destruction of the dam has only benefited one side, Russia. With vast swaths of the south flooded, it'll take weeks for the ground to be suitable for combat operations using heavy vehicles. This, in effect, made the south of Ukraine offensive-proof. Though in typical Russian fashion, they forgot to warn their own troops of the pending explosion, and many Russian positions were flooded or surrounded by water. It's unknown if any were killed, but we know that there were dozens of vehicles abandoned, confirmed via drone footage. Also, because Russia gonna Russia, it began shelling humanitarian rescue efforts for stranded civilians. At this point, Russia has committed so many war crimes, we're all basically just immune to it. And that is a bad thing, because the Russian Federation must eventually be held accountable. With each recon in force operation failing to find significant weak points in Russian lines, Ukraine suddenly changed tactics, and now it's launched what could be called a second offensive with completely different goals than the first. It's widely believed that Ukraine's original goal was to break through Russian lines and punch through to Melitopol or Mariupol, thus severing Russian lines of communication with forces in Crimea and southern Ukraine. That may still happen, but Ukraine is now fighting a completely different battle, and Russian soldiers have been taking to social media to complain about it. Sometime in June, Russian defenders began to breathe a sigh of relief. The expected artillery bombardment that preceded and directly supported each Ukrainian attack stopped coming. Frontline troops thanked their lucky stars that the deadly rain of high explosives had finally abated. In the rear, though, Russian artillerymen were getting a taste of their own medicine. With an information blackout across the front, Western sources were forced to turn to Russian social media channels like Telegram for information about the fighting. Here, soldiers have been regularly very unfiltered and honest about the fighting throughout the war, and suddenly one thing was becoming abundantly clear: Ukraine was killing Russian artillery at a staggering rate. Ukraine has been vastly outnumbered by Russian artillery since the war began. When you've got a big, dumb army like Russia, artillery is great. It has long range, and with a high enough volume of it, you really don't have to worry about having well-trained troops or fancy things like basic equipment or combined arms warfare. Well, unless you're facing an actual combined arms army. Luckily for Russia, it isn't. Unleashing literally hordes of self-propelled and towed artillery onto Ukraine, Russia soon turned eastern Ukraine into a moonscape. For most of the war, Russia enjoyed a staggering 20-to-1 advantage in artillery over Ukraine. That slackened to 8-to-1, sometimes even 6-to-1, as winter dragged on and both sides faced an ammo shortage. Now Ukraine has been working to reduce that disparity even further. Rather than support attacking troops with long-range fires, Ukraine's been holding its artillery in reserve and waiting for the Russian guns to open up. The moment they do, Ukrainian batteries open up in precise counter-battery fires, helped along by Western precision shells and counter-battery radars. This has had a devastating effect on Russian artillery, which, along with an ammo shortage, is now facing a shortage of actual guns, since Ukraine has been steadily blowing them and their operators to pieces. This shift in strategy comes at a cost to frontline troops undertaking dangerous assaults, but it's ultimately an investment in long-term victory. By leveling the long-range fire disparity between the two sides, Ukraine is neutralizing one of Russia's only real advantages in this war. And since Ukrainian infantry is better trained and better equipped, Russian guns have no choice but to open up and expose themselves to patiently waiting Ukrainian artillery. As has been seen time and again, Russia's only real successes have been down to its staggering advantage in artillery, and that advantage is steadily shrinking due to casualties and ammo shortages. Ukraine is also seeking to paralyze Russian logistics in the rear areas. It's been leveraging special operations forces and long-range weapons provided by the West to hit at Russian logistics with great efficacy. They've also been targeting key bridges in the rear areas to knock them out of commission, significantly complicating Russian resupply routes. This is a standard practice for a modern military, but with Russia not receiving the type of resupply that Ukraine is getting from the West, each ammo depot struck by Storm Shadow missiles represents a significant loss in capability that's not easy for Russia to replace over the long term. For its part, the West is finally getting over its shyness about equipping Ukraine properly. That's why this offensive is quickly being reshaped from an attempt to break through very tough Russian lines into setting the stage for future offensives, leveraging even greater amounts of more Western advanced equipment. But the West has to step up to the plate and quit pussyfooting around for this strategy to work. Abrams tanks will soon arrive in Ukraine, and more Leopards have been pledged, but the West needs to turn its arms factories on and pump out a steady stream of resupply for Ukraine. Piecemeal donations of equipment are no longer going to cut it, because despite truly apocalyptic losses, Putin and the Russian people have shown an incredible appetite for casualties, which is really Russia's greatest quality, to be honest. At character creation, Russia chose the sadomasochist perk, because the Russian people absolutely love pain and put up with losses that few other nations would stomach. With F-16s finally on the way, though, Ukraine is in a winning position over Russia. France recently pledged 50 of its long-range strike missiles, and the US is flirting so hard with the idea of giving Ukraine ATACMS that it's giving everyone blue balls. What's clear is that Ukraine can win this war, and it could win it quickly if the West would stop being scared of the world's weakest strongman, Vladimir Putin. Now go find out where Putin will drop his bombs when the infographic show makes fun of him one too many times with Russia's nuke targets, or click this other video instead.